Well, hello there, ladies and gents. I'm Tammy Sapnewski, your crypto queen. Thank you so much for popping by my channel for the Friday night live stream. Now, in a little bit, we're going to check out the New York Times DealBook Summit interview of Andrew Ross. Well, actually, the interview by Andrew Ross Sorkin of Sam Bankman-Fried. So we're going to get into that. I just want to remind people because it just blew me away while I was watching that there was a studio audience in-house. Of course, he appeared over, not telephonically, but just over the internet, like with what I do here, StreamYards. And the people in the audience were clapping for Sam Bankman-Fried. And you know what it actually reminded me of? The Hunger Games. Remember when they bring the tributes into the Capitol and everybody's sitting there with their crazy hairdos and their crazy outfits, and they're all clapping for these poor kids that are about to be sacrificed. Like, it makes no sense that these people are sitting there and clapping for Sam Bankman-Fried. Although I'll have to say, 100%, probably none of them were one of the people who got ripped off by FTX and Sam Bankman-Fried. But there were over 1 million people that were affected in the FTX Chapter 11. 1 million people. We're talking about billions and billions of dollars that were lost. Just to give you a little reminder. So last week, or maybe the week before, there was a woman named Elizabeth Holmes who ran a company, a pharmaceutical startup called Theranos. She stole the tune of like $200 million, and she was sentenced to 11 years in prison. This guy stole billions. Now, he didn't steal Bernie Madoff millions, okay? Bernie Madoff stole somewhere to the tune of like $65 billion. But don't forget, Bernie Madoff had been doing it significantly longer than SPF. Maybe SPF give him a little more time, and eventually he would have gotten up there. Also, don't forget that he had released freaking messages to a reporter over at Vox. Like, it's concrete right there, cemented, that he 100% did it, right? I wish I hadn't commingled funds, and maybe we should have labeled accounts differently, and it's absolutely crazy. What is up, Nick? Thank you so much for popping by the channel. Okay, so let's get into this interview, and just it's crazy. So let's get into it. We're going to watch it and check it out. Please let me know if the audio is good, if it's coming through clear.
Thank you, everyone.
No sound? Okay. Let me pause it here. Thank you for putting that up. But let me dump it out. I'll stop it and then I'll start it again. Maybe that has something to do with it. Share screen. I'm not sharing audio because it should be coming right through my headphones. Okay, now I'm going to start it again. Let me know if you guys can hear it. I'll pump this up a little bit. Nope. Okay, hold on a second. Well, I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna dump it. Sorry, guys. I'm so sorry about this. Normally this works, but I'm gonna have to do this. This might echo.
That we can have a candid conversation about what happened, how it happened.
Okay, I started
There
it
are
again.
people who are
Let me
angry,
hear
and they are
this.
seeking answers. I just want everybody in the audience to know that I received thousands of letters and emails, even in the past couple of days,
Okay, thank you,
from a
Coffee
lot of these
Founder.
people who feel like
Appreciate
they're
it.
victims. And some of them have questioned whether we should have this conversation, whether we should have this interview.
Look at this dude's
There are
face.
people who don't believe that this conversation should happen. And I just want to say that I think our job as journalists is to have those conversations, is to ask those questions
the
and seek
studio
those answers
audience
on
sitting
behalf of
there.
the public. And that is especially true right now. Sam, here's where I want to start this conversation, if we could. I think at this point there are two ways to view what has happened at FTX. And I know we'll get into all of the details in a moment, but I'm just going to go very basic. There's a generous view, and the generous view is that you are a young man who made a series of terrible, terrible, very, very bad decisions.
Oh God, the
The less
whitewashing.
generous view is that you have committed a massive fraud,
Yeah,
that this
that's
is a
it.
Ponzi scheme,
Totally,
a manipulation of the system.
totally.
And I want to start there because I think that there are so many people who have that question, which is, what is this? And what did happen?
Yeah, look, thanks for having me. And at the end of the day, I was CEO of FTX. And that means whatever happened, whatever it happened, I had a duty. I had a duty to all of our stakeholders, to our customers, our creditors. I had a duty to our employees, to our investors, and to the regulators in the world to do right by them, to make sure the right things happened at the company. And clearly, I didn't do a good job of that. Clearly, I made a lot of mistakes or
Criminal baby face like
I
Finster from
would
Bugs
give
Bunny.
anything to be able to do over again. I didn't ever try to commit fraud on anyone. I was excited about the prospects of FTX a month ago. I saw it as a thriving, growing business. I was shocked by what happened this month.
Oh, come on.
You know, reconstructing it, where there are things I wish I had done differently.
Oh, you think?
Let's talk about some of the things
You think you
would
wish
want
you
to
had
have done
done things
differently.
differently?
But I don't want this to be a discussion for folks because it's a lot of big numbers and often doesn't feel human. One of the letters I got, I want to read to you, Sam.
This one's a good one.
It's from a gentleman who said that
Very
he lost
direct.
his life savings.
He lost his life
And the
savings.
subject line is, Sam Bankman-Fried stole $2 million from me.
2
He says,
mil.
Andrew, can you please ask SBF why he decided to steal my life savings and the $10 billion more from customers to give to his hedge fund, Alameda? Can you ask him why his hedge fund was leveraging long all of these S coins? I'm going to keep it polite for the kids.
Shit coins.
Please ask him if he thinks what happened was fraud. These are the kinds of letters that I've been getting repeatedly over the past several days. What do you tell this man?
Yeah, I mean, I'm deeply sorry about what happened. Here's, you know, the long and short of what happened. And I'll start by saying, just to make a distinction here, you look at the US platform, you look at the international platform. The US platform is a US regulated platform with American users. To my knowledge, that's fully solvent, that's fully funded. And
Okay, so he's saying that the US one is fully solvent. But when he was messaging with the Vox reporter, he knows that the funds are commingled between Alameda and FTX. Definitely for sure.
you know, I believe that withdrawals could be opened up today and everyone could be made whole from that none of these problems plagued the US platform. Then you look at the international platform, you know, for their non-US users. And I mean, as the letter says, Alameda Research did have a long position. And the international platform, it's a margin trading platform. It's a derivatives platform. It's a platform where all the clients were, going on, placing something as collateral and using that to put on a position, whether that's a futures position, a spot position, a borrow. And what the exchange was storing was the collateral from all of those positions. Alameda Research was, one of those that put on positions there. And as I try and reconstruct this, over the last month, I have limited access to data, but my view of it, from what I have been able to see, is roughly that, basically, look, a year ago, Alameda had, I think, something like 10% leverage. Had something like 10 times the assets of the position that it had on. Over the course of the last year, there were a number of market crashes that drove the value of those assets down and the leverage up. I think it was, to my knowledge, still under 2x leverage, as of a month ago. You look at what happened this month, and in a few days, all out, PR assault, which led to a total market collapse in a pretty short period of time, no bid side liquidity. I think more than $10 billion wiped off in the matter of days. And realistically speaking, no ability for FTX to be able to liquidate that position and generate everything that was owed from it.
But I think the bigger question is where Alameda got the loan from, which is to say that there is a view that this is about commingling of funds.
100%.
And in that letter
He
that I
commingled
just
the
read you,
funds. But the first thing
this
first,
gentleman
can you believe now in this interview, he's like, yeah, my lawyers basically told me not to talk to anybody and not to do any of this. And it's really, I think, shocking that he has come out to speak publicly. Like, that's surprising. Normally, when people do this, like Bernie Madoff, he hid in his townhouse and you didn't see him at all. I think it's brave that he is coming out and speaking, but I think he believes that he's smarter than everyone else. And that's why this is labeled, the live stream is labeled, is he just whitewashing the situation, trying to launder his image? Does he believe that he maybe can hypnotize people into not blaming him for this? Like, look at me. I'm just a geek. I'm a nerd, and people kind of push me around and this happened. And so I
actually
don't know.
copy and pasted the terms of service for FTX into the email. And I just want to read you this. It says, none of the digital assets in your account are the property of or shall or may be loaned to FTX Trading. FTX Trading does not represent or treat digital assets in users' accounts as belonging to FTX Trading. So how is it possible that Alameda had this loan of such a large size?
So there's that piece from the terms of service, but there were a number of other parts of the terms of service and a number of other parts of the platform on top of that. There is the borrow lending facility, where users were lending billions of dollars of assets to each other, collateralized by assets on the exchange. You had obviously futures contracts where there are leverage positions on. Now, of course, all of this, it's meant to be the case that these are positions where FTX could, if it needed to, margin call those positions and close them down in time such that it would cover all of those, all those shorts, all those liabilities. Obviously, that wasn't the case here, and that's a massive failure of oversight, of risk management, and of diffusion of responsibility from myself running FTX. That's
a huge admission. Okay, we can pack this up and I'll go home, because what he just said was like, yeah, I effed up here and we did something that I said we were not going to do.
Yes.
But just make this very straight. Was there commingling of funds? That's what it appears like. It appears like there's been a genuine commingling of the funds that are of FTX customers that were not supposed to be commingled with your separate firm.
I didn't knowingly commingle funds.
He didn't knowingly do it.
One piece of this, you have the margin trading. You have, customers borrowing from each other. Alameda is one of those. I was frankly surprised by how big Alameda's position was, which points to another failure of oversight on my part.
How can you be surprised at how big the positions are? That's your company. Like, that's all you. Don't they run any reports? Are they just placing bets and like, not even checking against their balances or what they're doing? Like, this is an epic F up. Like, this is horrendous. He didn't know about their big positions. You're gambling with so much money and so many people's money and their future, and you don't even bother to check. Like, this is insanity.
And failure to appoint someone to be chiefly in charge of that. But
Talks about this
I
later.
wasn't trying to commingle funds.
But
Let
you
me ask
did.
this. The Wall Street Journal reported that Carolyn Ellison
This
told
chick.
Alameda staffers
I wonder where she
Alameda
is.
used FTX client funds to cover loans that were being recalled because of the Luna-triggered credit crunch. Carolyn says that she, Sam, Gary were aware of this. How do you square that with what you originally said over Twitter, that this was an $8 billion accounting mistake?
So I'll point to two things. And first of all, obviously, I don't know what anyone else is thinking here. I can only talk about it from what I know, from what I knew. And a lot of this is reconstructing it over the last month. I have limited access to data, but but what it seems like happened is in the middle of the year, a lot of most of the borrow lending desks in the space blew out or closed down, and it seems like Alameda had margin positions opened with them, and that it likely moved a bunch of that over to FTX this year when they shut down. And that means, I think it was over collateralized positions, but positions that involve substantial size and substantial US dollar size on the borrow side. In terms of the accounting mistake, again, looking through what happened, I think that there is a substantial discrepancy between what the financials were, what the audited financials were, the true financials, what the exchange understood. All of that was consistent, versus what the dashboards.
On just like a funny note, whenever you see pictures of this guy like in a magazine or something, he always looks older, more mature, like his face looks a lot more chiseled. So the first time I heard this dude speaking, that voice never matched any of the pictures that they would show. Like his picture that was on the cover of Fortune magazine, you wouldn't picture that voice coming out of that, right?
That we had displayed for Alameda's account there, which substantially under displayed the size of that position. And so that's one of the reasons that I was surprised when we dug into everything at how big that position had become.
But would you agree that there is a much more closely connected version of FTX International and Alameda than previously understood? Fair to say?
I saw that video of her.
Yeah, I mean, given the size of the position, I think it was, if not in intention, it was in effect tied together substantially more than I would have ever wanted it to be.
So you did an interview earlier this summer with Bloomberg, and you were asked about the connection between Alameda and FTX, and you said that obviously came from the same place because it started that way.
Yep.
And the same original people, but most of the remaining nexuses, you said, have dropped off.
Yep.
I know the people from Alameda decently well, almost as if you don't know what's happening there. And there isn't like a large amount, of ways remain that we are actively working together. Anything like that, Alameda is a wholly separate entity. They're different offices, like different principal offices. We don't have any shared personnel. We're also not the same company. We not all are under the same corporate umbrella or anything like that. And yet it seems like Alameda people, we're living in the same penthouse where you may very well be right now,
room over there.
together.
Most of Alameda was not there. I don't live there now, but not there now. I have not lived there for much of the time. But I did live with one or two members of Alameda for a little while. And I'll also say that as I was, earlier this summer, looking at the relationship, and this is a pretty big mistake and oversight of mine, I was viewing it primarily from the trading volume perspective, because that's what drives our revenue. And so when I was looking at how intertwined are FTX and Alameda, I was looking at, well, what fraction of trading volume, what fraction of liquidity on the platform does Alameda represent? That had fallen off from something like 45% in 2019 to something like 2% this year. But in terms of positions and balances,
Oh,
it
what
was
bullshit.
a much larger fraction. I hadn't been looking at that. That's a pretty big
But Sam,
Yeah.
I think the question is whether you were supposed to have access to these accounts to begin with. If I worked at a bank and was a bank teller,
Yep.
and I decided to leave the bank at the end of the evening and take the cash that I ostensibly had access to, even if I intended to bring it back to the bank later, even with
Yep.
more money to give them back, I still stole the money.
I mean, look, I wasn't running Alameda. I didn't know exactly what was going on. I didn't know the size of their position. A lot of these are things I've learned over the last month that I learned as I was sort of frantically digging into this on November 6th, November 7th, November 8th. Obviously that's a pretty big mistake on Mark. That's a pretty big oversight that I wasn't more aware. I think I was scared of, I was nervous because of the conflict of interest about being too involved. Obviously that shouldn't have meant.
He wrecked so many people. Let's not take our eyes off the ball here. I know he's trying to act like he's contrite. I didn't know. I kept my eye. It's incumbent upon a CEO to make sure that your clients are safe, especially when you're dealing with that. I mean, people are absolutely getting destroyed. For people that are just joining us, there is a gentleman that lost his life savings with FTX, $2 million, and he wants to know why SBF stole his money. I mean, this is just horrendous. Where are the people that are in charge of risk management? Where are the people that come in and do accounting? Right? Like, you're supposed to have a separate entity looking at all of this. Now, I know that there's no guidelines for cryptocurrency right now. There's no regulations, but when you have that much money on your balance sheets, wouldn't it be a good idea to keep track of it? To make sure that nothing is running afoul and that you can make customers whole if they choose to withdraw their funds. Like this guy just did, he did not give a crap. That's the bottom line. He didn't care about you at all, because if he did, he would have put those guardrails in place.
That I didn't have real oversight, or that,
Think?
and it really shouldn't have meant that I failed to appoint anyone to be in charge of that oversight, that relationship. But I haven't been running Alameda. I haven't been, thinking about its finances. I haven't been, making those decisions. But as CEO of FTX, it was still my duty to make sure that someone was doing diligence. I was a large owner of it. That is true, and had a lot of exposure on that side. But
so why wouldn't you have been focused on it if in fact that's actually where the profits were?
He's sitting around watching porn all day, probably.
I don't know that that's where, I think Alameda had made trading profits over the last few years, but FTX had made profits as well. FTX had been a profitable growing business. And that was more than a full-time job. I didn't have the bandwidth to run two companies at once. I didn't have the attention for it. And again, I was nervous about a conflict of interest between those two, and so was pretty intentional about not being very involved in.
Except for when you were stealing the funds from FTX to give to Alameda.
Begin?
So
when did when did the commingling of assets begin? This is going to be a pivotal question, and his lawyers are probably going to listen to his answer like nails on a chalkboard. They can't believe that he's doing this interview.
Lots of traders had open margin positions on FTX where they would have borrows of assets, where they would be short some asset against against other assets as collateral. That being said, again, looking through this now,
What's up, Dave?
I think that position size for Alameda got substantially larger over the course of 2022, and that it was, I think, substantially larger by October of 2022, probably by July of 2022 than it had been in April.
But it sounds like it's fair to say that there was always a connection between Alameda and FTX, and almost, I mean, not almost, but from the very, very beginning, and then it never really stopped.
Well, I think it had been in some ways reducing. I mean, when you scroll back to 2019, Alameda and FTX were very connected in a number of ways. One of these was that Alameda was the primary liquidity provider on FTX. It was 40-something% of volume. It was the backstop liquidity provider. And you scroll forward to 2022, it was down to 2% of volume. We had a lot of backstop liquidity providers, but it still had a big margin position on. And I was failing to pay nearly enough attention to positions and positional risk on the exchange, and to Alameda's in particular. And I also, frankly, made a mistake that I feel pretty embarrassed to have made. I mean, a lot of these are, but I substantially underestimated what the scale of a market crash could look like and what the speed of it could look like, and how correlated it would be.
But that just suggests that you were just hoping, perhaps hoping against hope, that this would all work out and that nobody therefore would realize what this commingling was all about?
So it's not how I viewed it. And in particular, again,
Let's bear in mind that, yeah, the market is shitty. It's probably still not near the bottom. But listen, if he hadn't taken out the funds, they would still be there for people to withdraw. Why are they taking out these huge margins in this kind of market? It is so risky. You see Terra Luna collapse. You see Three Arrows Capital go bankrupt. You watch Celsius go bankrupt. You see all of these infrastructures and these companies folding and crumbling, and you still have these huge margins open. It makes no sense. None.
Most of the firms had margin positions. Most of the firms had burrows on FTX. The problem here, this was too big. I was surprised by the size of what it was.
But it's not just too big. It's
I do
assets
not know.
look, it sounds like there were
What the
assets
hell was
that
he
may have
doing
been
all day?
allowable to be loaned, but then there were assets that weren't allowable to be loaned, no?
So I'm still looking into the details of some pieces of this, but
He's still looking into the
I
details.
do think that in addition to what I had seen as sort of law of the standard borrows here, that when we scroll back to 2018, or to 2019, I guess, FTX didn't have bank accounts. It didn't have any bank accounts globally.
This is where he's going to talk about the mislabeled accounts. And this is where he's trying to blame the situation of why they were taking money. He claims that there was a particular account that was an unfortunately labeled account. He thought it was their money when it was really the client money. So like the whole nexus of this whole thing, he's saying, is because of this mislabeled account, which was valued at about $4 billion.
We were trying to get them. It took us a while, took us a few years. And there are customers who wanted to wire money to FTX. And so I think in the meantime, some of them were wiring money to Alameda Research to get credited on FTX. And I think that was a substantial sum. And I think that the FTX's internal accounting did correctly, effectively try to debit Alameda for those funds, but it didn't happen in the primary account. And so it didn't happen, it created a discrepancy between the display of the account and what was really going on there. And I'm still looking into exactly how that worked mechanically. But that did make that position size substantially larger than I thought, and I think than what you would have gotten from most of the normal avenues.
What do you make of the argument that Alameda was used to effectively wash money into FTX, that American investors, who, by the way, were not technically allowed to even invest on FTX, were doing so, and FTX was doing it knowingly because the know your customer rules were being flouted by using this separate vehicle.
How would that allow customers to flout the know your customer rules? Are you talking about people who are trading on FTX US, or are you talking about customers of FTX International?
International, you just said that there was money being sent to Alameda and that Alameda was then providing credits onto FTX.
Right. But those users still had to go through the know your customer policy on FTX in order to do that. In order to use that ramp, customers still had to go through FTX's normal KYC onboarding.
So when do you think you knew there was a problem?
So
when was the problem?
the time that I really knew there was a problem was November 6th. November 6th was that was the date that the tweet about FTT came out, and by late on November 6th, we were putting together all of the data, putting together all the information that obviously I should have put together way earlier. That obviously should have been part of the dashboards I was always looking at. And when we looked at that, there was a potential serious problem there. And Alameda's position was big on FTX. It had just taken a huge hit. It had taken hits over the course of the year, but that was a particularly large and one and very abrupt. And we're seeing a run on the bank start, and that was leading to $4 billion a day of client withdrawals. At that point, we started calling prospective sources of financing because I was nervous about what was going to happen there. If you rewind.
Now let's remember that around that same time, CZ said that he held about $600 million worth of FTT, that he had gotten some, what he found to be suspicious information about FTT, and that he was about to dump his FTTs onto the open market, which, when you hear somebody talking about they own $600 million worth of anything and they're about to start selling it on the open market, you want to start dumping yours first, because by the time they're done dumping over $500 million of that, the price is absolutely going to crater. And when CZ had put out that tweet, he knew what he was doing. He was totally fudding FTX and Sam Bankman-Fried, because they've always had a little bit of a civil war going on between FTX and Binance. And those two guys, they're always doing the demeasuring, right? That's how all of these things start. And so he started that creation, that whole issue with the distrust and FUD of FTX. Then Carolyn put out a tweet saying, you know what? Hey, no problem. We'll buy those FTTs at $22 a piece. Now, people are saying, how did he accumulate so much FTT, like over $500 million? Well, initially, when FTX was starting up, CZ bought into it because he really wanted to help exchanges, because he wanted to bring about cryptocurrency adoption, and he figured the more places that are available for people to buy cryptocurrency, the better it's going to go for the space. So he invested a lot of money into FTX, and FTX at one point was looking to get licensed in some different places, and they needed information on all of the people who were investors in FTX. And Sam reached out to CZ and said, hey, we need your information about your money, because we're trying to get licensed in this particular area. I think it was Singapore. And CZ never sent the information. He's like, listen, stop dragging your feet. We need to get licensed here. You need to fill this out for us. And he's like, nah, I don't want to do it. So they're like, okay, well, we have to buy you out. So he bought CZ out using the FTT tokens. And that's how CZ wound up having so many of these FTT tokens on Binance.
Even a few days, I was a little bit nervous, but not on nearly the same scale. And I was thinking about risks that were substantially less.
When you say you were nervous, you were nervous the company was going to go under. You were nervous you were going to get caught. What were you nervous about?
On November 6th or before then?
Either.
So I think before then, what I was nervous about was that basically, and this started, I would say, November 2nd or so, when there was, Alameda balance sheet, through CoinDesk, and when I started to think a bit more about this, I was nervous that that would lead to substantial losses for Alameda, and that it would be a bit messy. I didn't think it was existential for FTX. I didn't think it was going to lead to a massive loss for FTX's customers. I was thinking of this as more like Alameda is going to be really tight on funds, and that maybe it would end up having some small impact on FTX, but not a significant one, not one that hurt customers at all. When you're talking about November 6th, late November 6th, then, and especially as we bleed into November 7th and 8th, I start to become nervous that FTX is not going to be able to fill customer withdrawals. And by late November 6th, I am very nervous about that, and I'm starting to think about emergency scenarios, and I'm starting to think about things might end quite badly here. And the core metric that I'm thinking of there is, will we be able to make sure all customers are whole? And on November 5th, I was feeling quite good about that. On November 7th, I was feeling quite uneasy about that.
I want to go back in time for a moment. This summer, you were described oftentimes as the JP Morgan of crypto, referencing the 1907 panic that he helped prevent. And you had purchased BlockFi, were making investments in
how the tables have
Voyager
turned
and all
since
sorts of
then.
other things. When you were doing that at that time, how much of that was an effort to prop up the value of things like FTT, which was the token of FTX, knowing that if a company like BlockFi, which owned a ton of it, that if it collapsed, FTT would collapse, and in large part, the quote unquote collateral that you had for Alameda would collapse?
So I don't think any of the borrow lending desks, to my knowledge, owned a lot of FTT. I think a lot of them, may have been using it as collateral, or taking it as collateral. I don't think they owned it though, or were going to sell it. And I think that most of them ended up closing down effectively all of their lines with Alameda one way or another. And so at that point, I think that was close to a sunk cost. And so I wasn't viewing it as having any impact on FTT in particular. I did view it as important for the industry's health. I did view it as a thing where I wanted to try to keep the industry stable. But I don't think it had any, really large FTT specific impact. And
did it have it? You didn't think it had any impact? It would have had no impact on Alameda or FTX if, for example, BlockFi were to have failed?
I don't think it would have had large direct impact. And the reason I say that is that I believe that Alameda ended up returning the vast majority of its open, borrows of its margin positions with the borrow lending desks in the middle of this year anyway. And so at that point, there wasn't that much left to save from that. At that point, I think the bigger thing was just not wanting the industry to implode.
Let's talk about collateral, because I think this entire experience has been a revelation for a lot of people about what might be collateral. And clearly you were using FTT and Solana and other tokens as collateral. And part of that required you to mark them in a specific way, a value to them.
Yep.
Do you think that you were marking them properly?
In Alameda's case, I don't think I was marking them the way I wish I had from a risk perspective.
You
And
think?
I want to sort of differentiate here, like expected value or sort of like worth or something like that from security. And you know, I think that I don't have any strong statements to make about, you know, what value they're assigned from sort of like, you know, a upside perspective or even a median case perspective. But clearly I was not nearly cautious enough from a downside perspective, from an extreme downside perspective. And, you know, I can tell you in my head, I was looking at a 30% down move over a few day period as a sort of like extreme tail case event that, you know, we had seen once before. And then, you know, what happened here was a 95% down move over the course of a year, and a, you know, 60% down move over a few day period with very little liquidity, and all happening at once in all of these coins in a correlated fashion, in which hedges didn't mean as much also because this was a specific crash on assets associated with Alameda Research rather than all assets. And so, you know, even correlated hedges had limited use there, and a run on the bank at the same time. And all of that are things, in retrospect, I should have expected might happen in an extreme scenario, because that's how markets work. And, you know, we've seen other examples of that in history where when things get really bad, they get really bad for all of the relevant things at once in a very direct and correlated and quick way.
I want to go back to the BlockFi acquisition for a moment. How much money do you think Alameda, I'd said that they had a lot of FTT, but that Alameda had borrowed from BlockFi at the time of the bailout?
I honestly don't know, but I would have guessed like 100 million, maybe a couple $100 million, but I honestly don't know the answer to that. I wasn't like running on, I wasn't paying detailed attention. That's my
This
guess.
just happened. How
And
can
were
you
you
not
using
know that?
FTT and Serum and other things to collateralize the loans at BlockFi, do you think? I mean, this goes to the whole idea of both the value of these things and also whether you were trying to buy BlockFi, in fact, to continue to support effectively Alameda or FTX.
Right. You know, it might be. I would guess it was, but you know, to your point, my guess is that like the amount paid for BlockFi was probably bigger than the amount that Alameda had opened with it. I mean, I don't know that for sure. Again, but I wasn't even looking at what that number was really. But I think that's about right.
I want to go back to the Alameda piece of it for just another moment, if you'd stick with me here. You had told investors and regulators that you were not involved in Alameda decision making, and yet in the case, Alameda invested $1.15 billion in Genesis digital assets without your consultation or approval. That's the question. And my understanding is you also served on the board of Genesis digital assets. And so I'm trying to understand how you wouldn't have been involved with Alameda. So
I was somewhat involved with venture investing, and that was done out of a separate entity than, you know, any of Alameda's proprietary trading, than its activity on FTX or other crypto exchanges. But I was consulted on some of its VC investments, including with GDA.
Guys, no one's going to trust
What are your lawyers telling you right now?
This is
Are they suggesting this is a good idea for you to be speaking?
This is funny.
They're very much not. I mean, you know,
You could hear the audience laughing in the background.
Anything
that pisses me off.
Recede into a hole.
When they clap for him, it just makes me
not who I am. I mean, it's not who I want to be. I don't have. I think I have a duty to talk to people. I have a duty to explain what happened, and I think I have a duty to do everything I can to try and do what's right. If there is anything I can do to try and help customers out here, and I don't see what good is accomplished by me just sitting locked, in a room pretending the outside world doesn't exist.
you're in the Bahamas right now. Are you in the Bahamas because you think you can't leave?
No, I'm in the Bahamas. I
Doing this
I
because they
have
don't
been
want
in the
to
Bahamas for the
jail
last
him.
year, and I've been running FTX from the Bahamas.
I think he's
Running
trying to
FTX
talk his
Digital
way out of
Markets, our
everything.
Primary operating entity down here. With
And he
the
better not.
Canadian
Like, he has to go to
regulators
jail, right?
and others
Do you guys think he has
in
to go to
contact.
jail?
And
I think he has to go to
right
jail
now,
for this.
I'm looking to be helpful anywhere I can
He
with
has-
any of the global entities.
He has set back crypto so far. Like, so far, I think this is the biggest issue, the biggest fraud, all out fraud in crypto right here. FTX and Alameda and SBF, huge. This is seriously bad.
That that would want my help.
Do you think you could come to the United States or go elsewhere?
I to my knowledge, I could.
Have you thought about doing that?
I've thought about it, and I mean, I've seen a lot of the obviously a lot of the hearings that have been happening. I would not be surprised if sometime I am up there talking about what happened to our representatives, or wherever else is most appropriate.
How concerned are you about criminal liability at this point?
No, he's got to be crapping his
I don't
jaws.
think that, I mean, obviously, I don't personally think that I have, but I think the real answer is that's not. It sounds weird to say, but I think the real answer is that's not what I'm focusing on. It's there's going to be a time and a place for me to sort of think about myself and my own future. But
Sure, he's not
think
thinking
this
about
is it.
he might go to
Like,
jail.
Right
Sure,
now, I mean,
probably
look,
never
I've
crossed
had a
his
bad
mind.
month. This has not been a fun month for me, but that's not what matters here. Like,
And
what
there's the
matters here
audience
is
laughing in his
the
jokes.
millions of
and
customers. What matters here
It sickens
is
me.
all
It's
the
the Hunger
stakeholders
Games.
in FTX
It's the Hunger Games.
who got hurt, and
Crazy
trying to
audience.
do everything I can to help them out. And
So out of touch.
as long as that's the case, like, I don't think that what happens with me is the important part of that, and I don't think that's what it makes sense for me to be focusing on.
Sam, help me with this. On November 7th, you tweeted and then deleted a tweet that said, quote, FTX has enough to cover all client holdings. We don't invest client assets, even treasuries.
Yep.
We've been processing all withdrawals and will continue to be, unquote. You then deleted that tweet.
Dirty delete.
And literally just moments ago, you told me it was on November 7th that things took a turn.
Yep.
You telling the truth?
So things were changing fast. And, when you look at November 6th, I was feeling nervous, but I felt like things were probably going to end up okay. We still had, assets way larger than liabilities. And yeah, there's increasing withdrawal demand, but we were meeting all of it. We were processing all of it, although it was a
God,
weekend.
we're only
We
halfway
were a
through
day
this.
delayed on a lot of wire transfers and stablecoin creations, and Bitcoin node was overloaded, but their assets were continuing to process. By November 8th, I did not think the odds were that high.
Now, don't forget, just a few days before is when CZ put the tweet out,
worried that there was going to be a
which
substantial liquidity
screwed him.
shortfall. November 7th, that was sort of the transition day,
tweet
and
was like the
even just the start versus the end of
slap
November
around the
7th,
world.
I felt fairly different.
Wrong
I
Nope,
can't
no
remember exactly what I said there or
There we
when I
go.
sent that, but I remember trying to think about, feeling conflicted about what to say, and trying to think about what I could say that I believed. And by not that long later, I no longer believed that. That no longer felt like it had much.
So
like that
he's
was
saying
a at all reasonable representation.
in like the span of a few hours, he went from everything is going to be okay, we got this, everything's okay, to oh my gosh, something's wrong, we're screwed, in just a couple of hours. That's how many people were trying to pull their assets off FTX, and they just didn't have anything there to give out.
Where my mind was at. And I don't remember exactly when I deleted it, but I remember at some point it's like, it shouldn't be there.
Let me ask you a different question, because this is all around the same time. The New York Times reported that $515 million was suspiciously, in quote, transferred from FTX wallets after the bankruptcy filing.
Here's the hack.
And there have been accusations that this is the assistance, effectively, of theft.
This is the
Where'd that money go?
hack / backdoor.
So I will caveat this by saying, at that point, I was being cut off from systems. And so I'll give you the answer to the extent that I know it, which is that I believe that a few different things happened within a short period there. I think that the US team took actions to seize some of the assets and put it in custody from the exchange. I believe that it has been announced that the Bahamian regulators took some of the assets into safekeeping as well around that same time. And I think there may have, in addition to both of those, also been some actually improper access of assets on the exchange. And I don't know the details of that. I don't have the resources to trace through exactly what happened there. And I don't know who is behind that third part.
I want to go back to one thing about the Bahamas. The Bahamian authorities have now admitted effectively that they ordered the transfer, it sounds like, of certain FTX assets to wallets under their control after the US bankruptcy was filed. Did you help them with that? Did you discuss that with them?
So I can't discuss specifics, but I will note that prior to Chapter 11 having been filed, the Bahamian authorities had placed FTX Digital Markets, the Bahamian entity, which is the primary operating entity of FTX International, under supervision of a JPL system in the Bahamas, with oversight from the Securities Commission of the Bahamas, and were, to my knowledge, taking actions to protect FDM's clients and customers there.
Well, FTX Bahamian authority did a pretty shitty job.
For belaboring this point, but
we
were talking about FTX and the derivative piece of it earlier, and I had made a note earlier about this because you had told the Senate, so you were sitting in the Senate at the time, on February 9th, 2022, during a hearing, you said,
lying his ass off
US
during all of
derivatives,
those hearings and laughing
all
as
of
soon as
these
he
contracts
left.
are fully collateralized. Was that true?
Yes, and again,
made
FTX
fools of
US, to my knowledge,
all of our
totally solvent.
politicians.
FTX US derivatives,
Isn't hard to
totally
do.
solvent. And in fact, I believe FTX US derivatives, Ledger X, may even be up and running right now. I'm confused why FTX US is not processing customer withdrawals right now. I would think it should be, because I believe, to my knowledge, that it could be and could make all Americans 100% whole from this. So and FTX US derivatives, as I said there, doesn't even allow leverage of any sort. It was close to a spot trading platform. And so yeah, to my knowledge, all American customers and all American regulated businesses and exchanges here are
You're
I
right.
think at least
Totally.
in terms of client assets are okay. Obviously, I don't know what's happened with you can make your own judgments about the enterprise value of those businesses.
Oh, so he's like, oh, well, I don't understand why, FTX US won't allow for withdrawals. As far as I know, everything is whole. People should be able to get their assets off FTX US. The only problem is US Internet. I don't know what's happened. But then why did you file for Chapter 11?
Over the summer, you paid a $2.5 billion loan to Barry Silbert's Genesis. This was in August. And I was just trying to think through the dynamics of what might have been happening at your firm and was wondering, where did the money come from?
So when you say you did that, I presume that that's Alameda Research that did that. Is that right?
Yes, yeah, that's the case.
So I don't have all of the details there, but my understanding is that, and I don't know exactly what's going on Genesis's side then, I don't know now, but my understanding is I believe Genesis tried to call in a large number of loans from Alameda. I believe that that happened, and that closed down a lot of positions that Alameda had opened with Genesis and other trading desks. And that was what I was thinking at the time. And that's, I think, what happened there. I also think that may have led to an increase of position size of Alameda on FTX in retrospect.
Yeah, he needs to go to prison for a long time.
You did an interview, I think perhaps inadvertently, over Twitter DMs with a reporter at Vox, and had spoken about ESG, but also about what you described as the shibboleths of what it meant to look good in corporate America today. And that a lot of the things that you were doing were not necessarily things you actually believed or believed in.
Yeah, he's a liar. In those comments,
absolutely.
you can see
And,
he's a total liar.
A frustrating experience.
Everything he does is for optics. Like this interview, it's for optics.
Stupidly forgot was also a reporter.
Let me, what he said there is that back and forth that he had with the Vox reporter, he had this back and forth with them because was a friend. He believed like just a regular friend, and he's like, I forgot he was a reporter. And whenever you have a discussion with a reporter, if you want it to be kept quiet, you have to say, and this is off the record. If you don't say that, all's fair.
I thought I was speaking in a personal capacity. I'm not sure what they thought the capacity was at the time, but it certainly ended up being reported on. And, I think what I'd say is, look, there are a lot of things that I think have really massive impact on the world. And
he's like, damn, my boy threw me under the bus.
And I mean, I think frankly that the blockchain industry could have substantial positive impact. But I was thinking a lot about bed nets and malaria, about saving people from diseases no one should die from, about animal welfare, about pandemic prevention, and what could be done on a large scale to help mitigate those things. I think matter, and they're
oh well, thanks for doing that with our money.
Separately from that, there's
how easy it is to be charitable with somebody else's checkbook, right, guys?
To try and look good, and these are things that everyone who does them basically knows they're kind of dumb. That these are not things that are making large impact on the world. These are not looking at saving thousands of lives. These are the kind of like, if like 3 different quarterbacks throw a touchdown in the same game for the same team, we'll donate 2 used cars to charity type campaigns, where it's not going to happen. It's never happened. There's no expectation of a car getting donated. It's just a PR campaign, sort of masquerading as do-gooderism. And things like greenwashing are things which I think end up in a somewhat similar area.
Fair to say you participated in this?
Yeah, we all did, and FTX did as well. And there are things I felt like we needed to do for the business. There are things that I felt like were crucial for us being able. I mean, I wish the world didn't work this way. I wish that these weren't relevant to your ability to get regulated, to your ability to get bank accounts, but they were. And we had promotional campaigns, we had marketing slogans, and we thought about what we could do to, and we thought of ourselves as legitimately trying to do
what
good,
he just said made no sense. What we had to do to get bank accounts,
that our image reflected that. And
the hell,
there's a lot of just unimpactful things there that
not
ultimately,
their image,
I
his image
in some circles got more attention than actually impactful things. And I think that on the more tasteful end of the spectrum, you can see things like small scale but real charitable initiatives. And on, I think, the less tasteful end of the spectrum, frankly speaking, I mean, I think even things like making sure that all materials have perfect English grammar is a thing where that was important.
Sam, let me ask you about this, though, because the
Wait,
other piece of it
that
is,
everything had perfect English grammar? How possibly could that cost money? How does that have to do with anything? Stupid.
using your money and influence, and I think there's a question about whose money you were using, but to donate, for example, to the Democratic Party, in large part to influence regulation. And I think as people have looked through now some of the regulation you were pushing for at CFIUS, for example, some of that regulation would have allowed you, frankly, to, quote, self-certify a lot of what was going on at FTX. And there are people who look at that and say it was all part of a scheme.
So, I mean, unpacking piece of that, when you look at like the CFTC regulation there, ultimately there may have been an ability to self-certify contracts, but prior to that, we went through a congressional hearing, a public comment period, a public roundtable, a year of inquiries, and tens of thousands of hours, thousands of pages of submitted documents, and still had not gotten to the point of having a license to offer merchant futures in the United States. And so it was an extraordinarily long and hard process that we were going through with the CFTC. It was by far the most intensive regulatory process that I'd ever seen.
Can you speak to the lobbying piece of it, though?
Yeah.
And the donations piece of it? Because I think that's become part of the story as to whether you effectively were influencing lawmakers to do your bidding. And given the state of your current company, questions about whether that should be the case.
Lobbyists are the people that bribe the
lawmakers
politicians.
were not ruling on FTX. FTX didn't have an application before Congress for anything.
Run out of Washington, D.C.
My donations were
everything is so crooked. All the politicians are dirty and crooked. It doesn't matter if you're a Republican or a Democrat. You're dirty.
In
We need
favor
term
of
limits,
doing
people.
things now to prevent the next pandemic. That was the primary thing that I was supporting with those contributions. And it was on both sides of the aisle, primarily operating in both primaries, because I wasn't viewing it as a partisan exercise. I was not, most of this was not looking at donating to one party to beat the other one in the general elections here. It was not only was it on both sides, but even within each side, it was between two candidates in the same party, and it was looking at pandemic policy.
Where did the money come from for those donations?
So, basically profits. I mean, it was substantially smaller than the amount of trading profits that Alameda had made over the prior few years.
Related to this, you had a meeting with Gary Gensler. You also met with folks at CFIUS.
I bet he had a meeting with
needed
Gary
to buy
Gensler.
your way into those meetings?
I mean, I don't think I need to buy my way into them. I do think it was harder than I would have thought it would be to get to the point of being even able to have meetings with some regulators. And I mean, I spent hundreds of hours, probably thousands of hours in DC trying to get to the point where I could even have meetings with some of the relevant regulators. But that wasn't a money thing. And I mean, there's no donations to Gary Gensler's. He doesn't even have a campaign to donate to in the first place. That was like elbow grease. I mean, that was just asking again and again and again to have meetings with relevant regulators and, submitting hundreds and thousands of pages of documents.
You also made big investments in a number of media companies.
And let me just say, one of the big reasons why CZ had a problem with him and a lot of other people in the cryptocurrency space really had a problem with Sam Bankman-Fried was because he was going up to Washington, D.C. as the poster child of cryptocurrency, and they felt like he really was not a very good representative. Like, he wanted too much regulation. Now, remember, there's the DCCPA, which is the Digital Consumers, no, Digital Commodities Consumers Protection Act. If they pass this, that, I mean, DeFi could be gone. So they definitely don't want that. And they feel like, he's not a good representative for us as cryptocurrency in the space as a whole. That he just basically kisses the ass of these politicians. And he does. And he's wound up being the biggest crook.
A lot of questions about whether you were trying to buy influence. Can you speak to that?
I mean, I think media matters a lot, and I want to support good media ventures. That was the whole thesis there. And
Russ doesn't even lie this much.
I don't have like governance over any of these. I wasn't looking for governance over them. I was looking to support journalists doing great work because I think what they do is really important, and I think that there needs to be a critical eye on stories.
Now, hasn't this really paid off for him? He's bought off politicians. Oh, and we find out he has bought off the media. So you have to wonder why they're writing puff pieces about him and not crucifying this guy for what he's done.
Getting the brunt of a lot of that right now. And, frankly, I think it's healthy for the world that there is real investigative journalism.
Your parents are law professors.
Real and wink, wink.
What did you tell them when all of this happened?
What'd you tell mommy and daddy?
I mean, I don't remember exactly when I reached out to them, but I think I called them up and said, "Hey guys, I think there might be a problem. Like things, looks like Alamia's position might be imploding here, and there might be liquidity issues, and I'll tell you more when I know more." That's my guess about roughly what I said. But honestly, that week so much happened. It's a little bit of a blur to me exactly what
and
was
what
said
are they
when.
telling you now?
And look, it's been a hard period for anyone who was close to me, and none of them deserved that. And I feel really, I mean, look, like a lot of, obviously the largest number of people who were hurt here were customers, and I feel incredibly bad about that. But anyone who was close to me, including my parents, including employees, coworkers who fought with the company to push forward, were hurt by this and bore no responsibility for that. I feel really bad about that, and I mean, I feel really grateful for the support that my parents are still giving me, throughout all of this.
Can you explain the real estate piece of this?
You're not going to
I think there have been a number of headlines, as you know, about FTX, the company buying a lot of real estate up in the Bahamas, where you lived, at least at the time, was owned by the company. But then there's also reports that your parents signed and were effectively provided with what seemed like a vacation home.
So
where's all the property?
I don't know the details of that house for my parents, but I know that it was not intended to be their long-term property. I know it was intended to be the company's property. I don't know how that was papered, and I think that was where it was and will end up. I think they may have stayed there while working, with the company sometime over the last year. When you look at the rest of it, there were a lot of property purchases in the Bahamas. The reason for that is we had, 100, basically 100 Silicon Valley, top Silicon Valley employees come down here to work for FTX. And, we were trying to incentivize that and to, make sure that they have
100 top Silicon Valley people moved to the Bahamas to work for FTX is why he's saying they needed to buy all of that real estate. And none of these people knew anything about the finances of the company that they worked at. Now, I get a lot of these people have to build, they're probably coders and doing the infrastructure and stuff, but nobody knew shit. Like, how many people work there on a daily basis? Like, when he would do an interview from the FTX headquarters, the place always looked vacant. Like, I don't understand where were the people?
Had an easy way to find a comfortable life, so that they'd be willing to move and help build out the product. And so, those 100 people put together here did end up, buying a substantial amount of property. And I feel bad about some of how those investments may turn out for them.
Can you just speak to the idea of this company that, at least from the public perspective, seemed like a regulated company or something that was very focused on compliance? You would go to Washington, you talk about compliance, you talk about trust. Crypto ultimately is actually about trust.
Us, you guys. He hurt.
Not having to trust others, frankly. It's supposed to be a trustless system. That's why you trust it so much, supposedly. But it seems like when you read the stories, it sounds like a bunch of kids who were on Adderall having a sleepover party.
I mean, look, I screwed up. Like, I was CEO. I was the CEO of FTX. And I mean, I'd say this again and again, that means I had a responsibility. That means that I was responsible ultimately for us doing the right things. And I mean,
That's right.
Like, we messed up big.
But there were people, though, who were telling you needed more compliance, no?
There were, but I think that compliance, we were spending an enormous amount of our energy on compliance. We were spending an enormous amount of our energy on regulation, on licensure. We were getting licensed in dozens of jurisdictions. I think, frankly, we were spending probably too much of our energy getting licensed in retrospect. There were some places where I think that the reporting and transparency obligations from that licensure actually did help. I think when you look at, FTX US derivatives, I think when you look at
not
FTX
enough.
Japan, which I think is fully solvent, which I think could make all customers whole tomorrow if it were, the sort of relevant teams were to allow it to. I'm confused why it hasn't.
Because you claim bankruptcy. There's a flow.
I think that a lot of what we ended up doing and focusing on was a distraction to some extent from one unbelievably important area that we completely failed on, and that was
just
risk.
one.
That was risk management. That was customer position risk, and frankly, conflict of interest risk. And there was no person who was chiefly in charge of positional risk of customers on FTX.
How do you not have somebody in that
because
position?
that was, you go back to 2019,
risk management.
2018 asked me,
There's
why am I
nobody
starting
there?
to build out FTX? What's the point of it? And what I would have said was, look, the existing crypto derivatives exchanges have large risk management failures, that every day there are millions of dollars that are being lost by customers because of risk management failures, that these contracts are paying out 75 cents on the dollar week after week after week because of risk management blowouts, and that needs to be overhauled. And that was what I was focused on for the beginning of FTX. I was not focused on that for the last year or two. I got less grounded from that, and I started focusing on the bigger picture, on future business avenues, on licensure, on a lot of things. And we lost track of a really important part of the business and of the product. And so there absolutely were management failures, huge management failures.
It just makes you seem like
there were
didn't
oversight
look at
failures,
their books
transparency
for a
failures,
whole
reporting,
year.
so
They
many
just
things we
didn't
should
pay
have had in
attention
place.
to it. Oh,
I think
well,
that
we'll
a
just
lot of it
gamble.
was on the risk management side.
Let me ask you about
rather-
that,
yeah.
which is, we had Larry Fink here today, and he had a stake
Yep.
in FTX.
Larry Fink is
And
the CEO
Sequoia
of
and Paradigm
BlackRock.
and some very big
They
venture
manage
capital firms had
million,
given you money. And
50
I'm curious
trillion,
if they ever asked
but
you
a lot. They're the
questions
biggest money management.
about this risk management and whether they bear any responsibility for what clearly now appears, and you're saying, was at minimum a lack of oversight, if not something much worse.
I don't think they bear responsibility. I mean, like when you look at, you put your size, you put yourself in the eyes of an investor, of a venture capital firm. What you're thinking about primarily,
I remember when
is
Enoch
upside.
said that they were going to
what
be
you're
on
thinking about
finance.
primarily is investing in a private company and thinking, might this 3x, might this 5x, might this even 10x on the upside cases. And yeah, there's some chance that it will go down. There's some chance that maybe it will go down to zero.
Say Tom into a
But
penny
that's
or a
counterbalanced
dollar. I
by
can't remember.
the upside propositions here. And so most of what they were focused on was, I think like, what might FTX become? What's the pathway to get from here to there? What would it take? What are the missing pieces? Rather than, at the point where you're dwelling on all of the various precise downside scenarios and risks for
It's
a
late
prospective
now. I
venture
mean,
investment, that means you're not investing. Like if that's where your head's at, if you think the odds are that that's where things are going to end up, why would you do that investment?
this
Can I
guy.
ask you about the drugs? You have tweeted about it. Caroline has tweeted about others have tweeted about uppers and
Drugs.
downers,
Let's
and
about
all sorts of
drugs.
things. There have been pictures taken of something called MSAM, which apparently increases levels of dopamine to the brain. It's actually
Yeah,
for
I want to get
Parkinson's.
that.
Were you
Ooh,
taking that as a patch?
scheduling.
So it's funny hearing this. I had my first sip of alcohol after my 21st birthday.
Denials.
I think I have maybe half a glass of alcohol a year, roughly speaking.
Me too,
There
but
are no
I smoke weed.
wild parties here. When we had parties, we'd play.
It's legal here in
games,
Jersey,
and,
people. Okay.
20% of people
Queen's
would
not
have
breaking
3/4
laws.
of a beer each, or something like that. And the rest of us would not drink anything. I see any legal drug use around me, at the office, at these parties, like, and
Good night. Thank you very much. Take care.
Having
I
people over
appreciate
for dinner
you.
is what that meant. And look, I can't talk about anyone else, like
Guns and Loaded. What a
what they're
name.
prescribed between themselves and
Guns N'
their
Roses.
doctors or psychiatrists. I can say for me, I don't know, like I've been prescribed various things at various times to help with focus and concentration. And I think they
That
have done
apparently
that.
didn't help.
I haven't felt any of the sort of impact that I think people have been theorizing here from it. And it's not a huge impact, in the first place. Anyway, I think these have all just been totally on label use of medications, and I think things that on the margin help me focus a little bit. I wish I had been a lot more focused over the last year.
Yeah, you should have slapped those patches all over
I
your
may have been
body. The
unfocused in
schedule,
this
it's a
last moment
patch.
because I actually wanted to follow up on the
That you
question
put
we were
on
talking
you.
about venture capitalists.
Yep.
Sequoia and Paradigm invested in you, but there have now been questions about the fact that you invested in them and whether these were what some people describe in the business round-trip deals. Can you speak to that?
I mean, I think well after they had invested in FTX, and I don't know the details, but I think there may have been a small investment into some of their funds. I think it was something that we did because we believed in what they were doing. It seemed like a good opportunity.
10 more minutes.
Didn't think too much about it.
That was a very short
Curious,
answer.
just on a very personal level, as we get close to ending this conversation, to the degree that there's been a lesson in this and that what you see as your future at this point. I know you're taking it day to day, obviously. And I know you're an optimist as well. We've talked about that. But what do you think realistically is your future?
Jail.
I don't know what my far future is. And, when you fast forward, I have no idea what I'm going to be doing, a long time from now. I think when I look at, at the near and medium term, what am I thinking? What I'm thinking is, and again, I don't know what's going to happen. And a lot of it's not in my hands at this point. But
Going down.
I want to be helpful wherever I can to regulators, administrators, internationally who are working.
He wants to be helpful. Oh my
to help
gosh.
FTX's customers.
Can't make this.
And I want to be helpful wherever I can on anything that could help bring a lot more value to those customers. And
You can't make this
I
up.
don't know where that will lead. I can say that prior to filing, there had been a lot of interest in financing, a lot of fairly strong interest, many billions of dollars worth. I don't, I can't make any promises about anything, but I would have thought that there would be, a chance for a pathway forward here that would bring more value to customers than what would happen if you just sort of sold everything else for, for scraps.
Right.
And I don't have confidence. I can't promise you, and I can't promise anyone anything there, and it's not really in my hands to a large extent. But
That's
but
what
I would
happens
think
when
that
you
it would make
file
sense to be
Chapter
exploring
11.
that,
My God.
because I think there's a chance that customers could end up made a lot more whole. I don't know, maybe even fully whole, if there was a really strong concerted effort.
How would that happen?
So, there have been examples of this before in crypto history where that happened. Obviously,
Like, take, for instance, what's going on with Celsius right now. Celsius keeps selling the assets to stay afloat because they say they have to pay necessary personnel, and this is going on months and months and months and months. They're paying these people for
happened
what?
with FTX, back a number of years ago, where it got hacked and then ended up making, over a few year period, customers whole.
Because
there
Simon
are a lot
Dixon
of
bailed them
assets
out.
that
Well, didn't bail
are
them
on
out, but he
hand
came up
here,
with a
although
great
many of them are
plan.
not liquid. They were worth quite a bit more than the needed liabilities a month ago, even let alone a year ago. There's at least a month ago there were or I guess 3 weeks ago, billions of dollars of potential funding opportunities. I don't know that it would have been great for my
Who's gonna put money
stake as
there
a
now?
shareholder
Come on.
of FTX, but that's not what matters here. And I think it would have brought more financing to customers. You saw, obviously, the Tron facility, which is open for a little
Then you
while
shouldn't have
on
claimed bankruptcy.
FTX, which allowed some customers to get liquidity. And you put some of these together. There's obviously equity in the business. Where does that lead? I don't know exactly. And again, it's not going to be my decision to make at the end of the day. But I think there's a shot for real value.
Sam, we're going to have to wrap up. And a
don't
couple
know.
of just quick other questions. One is, given what you know about compliance or the lack of it in this business, in this industry, I think there are a lot of people who are holding crypto today, perhaps on exchanges like Binance and other places.
Yep.
This is pivotal.
What should they think, given what you do know, and to the extent that you can tell us the truth about what you know?
What should they think? And I presume you're asking, what should they think about the safety of their assets going forward? And
Correct.
yeah. So look, I obviously don't know exactly what's going on at other exchanges. I can tell you what I would think as a customer, if I were a customer here, which is look for the things that I wish FTX had been able to supply. Things like proof of reserves is helpful. Look for as rigorous of that as you can. Look for regulatory reporting, right? You look at what the JFSA had in place in Japan. You look at what FTX US derivatives had with, sort of frequent reporting to regulators of exactly what, customer assets, balances, liabilities, distributions are.
What about the governance piece?
Yeah.
What about the governance piece? Because one of the things we have not talked about is you had no board and you had no CFO. And that should have been a red flag, frankly, for all of us.
So interestingly, in some ways, we had too many boards. We had.
Oh, goodness. Hopefully, we're going to get him back in just a moment. If we can, thank you for indulging us.
He
We are
basically
almost
says that
finished with this,
we had
this
too many
interview.
boards because
Are
all
we
the
going to get him
different
back?
FTXs had their own boards. And you know, with the boards,
Hang tight just
you're
for 1
paying
second, if we could.
decisions,
Can we
and
try
you
to
have
bring
all
Sam
of
back
the boards all over the place. You're paying
just to
these
complete
guys.
this interview?
And
Thanks, everybody, for sticking with us. We are going to be
what did
back with
all
Sam
these boards
Bankman-Fried,
do if none
I
if
believe,
none
in
of these
just
people on the board was
literally
like,
a
hey,
moment as they
it would
connect
be
the
a great
feed. Sam,
idea
thank you for coming back.
if we
We were in the
checked
middle
out
of the
the
conversation
finances
about
to make sure that we
no board,
have assets
no
that
CFO, and you
match
said
what the
something which I think raised a
depositors
lot of
have put into
eyebrows here.
their
You said
accounts.
you thought you had too many
None
boards.
of them did that.
Yeah.
Too many boards.
And can you hear me here?
Yep, we can all hear you.
Good? Yep, cool. So we didn't talk about much, but there's a board of FTX Japan, there's a board of FTX US derivatives, FTX Australia, FTX Singapore, FTX Europe. You know, we had, I think, more than a dozen boards when you look at all of the entities put together. And, you know, many of these boards had regulatory functions. I think the problem to some extent was, okay, sure, you have all these boards, but at the end of the day, when push comes to shove, who's the person who's in charge of global or the board or the function that's in charge of, you know, global site customer risk management? Like, you know, there's a diffusion of responsibility to some extent on that front. And, you know, there needed to be, I think, a single or a small set of entities, whether of boards, people, of responsible parties that were sitting there saying, I feel responsible for what happens on FTX. And you know, we had actually, you know, audited financials. You know, from the FTX finances perspective, we had infrastructure, but from the customer risk and finances perspective, much less.
Sam, how much money do you have left at this point?
I mean, to my knowledge, like close to nothing. I mean, basically everything that's just in the companies. I mean, it's.
You didn't put away some money somewhere?
No, I don't have any, you know, hidden funds here. Everything I have, I'm you know, disclosing, and you know, I'm down to I think I have one working credit card left. I think it might be $100,000 or something like that in that bank account. I mean, you know, everything that I had, even all the loans I had were those, you know, those are all things I was reinvesting.
I don't believe that this guy that has been in cryptocurrency doesn't have Bitcoin and Ether and all this other stuff squirreled away somewhere. I don't believe it.
In the businesses that
Come
I
on.
put everything I had into FTX.
I want to ask you two final questions.
So did other people
Were you
who
truthful
lost
with
it
us
all.
today?
I was as truthful as you know,
Don't like that he
knowledgeable would
doesn't
be.
look into the camera.
There's some things I wish I knew more about, but yes, I was.
So let me ask you this. Do you agree that over time you also lied?
Do I agree that I lied? I don't know of times when I lied. I think, look, there are certainly times when I was acting as a representative, as a marketer for FTX, and when I was looking for how can I, you know, in a way which is truthful, but, you know, paint FTX as, you know, compelling a way as possible, as exciting and optimistic a way as possible. And, you know, I wasn't thinking about, I wasn't talking about what are the risks involved with FTX, you know, there. Right. I obviously wish that I'd spent more time dwelling on the downsides and less time thinking about the upsides.
Sam Bankman-Fried, I want to thank you for this interview. I hope that some of the answers have been helpful as we've tried to understand and untangle what is a still tangled story Sam, I know that this has been a difficult conversation and a tough conversation. And on behalf of everybody here and on behalf of the public, I want to thank you for engaging in it at a time in truth when I know you've been advised not to. So thank you so very, very much. Thank you.
And there's the audience cheering for his little ass. So there we go. I mean, listen, when it comes to, I mean, certainly he sounds contrite, right? The guy's sitting there, he sounds contrite. He's answering these questions, even though his attorneys probably have not only advised him not to, but damn sure begged him not to do these interviews. He's done that interview. He did an interview with George Stephanopoulos. Of course, notoriously, the first interview he gives is to Tiffany Fong. And they're telling him not to do it, right? But he does sound contrite. He does. Sounds contrite. Just because he sounds contrite does not mean that he's being truthful. There are people who lie very well because they lack feelings. These people are known as sociopaths. And they can seem very contrite and they seem like they're telling the truth because it doesn't faze them that they're lying. When you have billions of dollars that are missing off of your platform, people's, this, like Alex Mashinsky of Celsius, that guy, right before the day that they halted withdrawals, he was telling everybody that everything is fine. If you've heard any FUD about Celsius, it's bullcrap. Everything's okay here. The very next day, they halted withdrawals. Shortly thereafter, filed for bankruptcy protections, right? And he has been milking that. He's been milking it ever since. All of these months, people are getting paid at Celsius, even though they're in bankruptcy. They're trying to do a reorganization, which is not going to work, or it's not going to work with the people that have in control right now. I don't know why they just don't let Simon Dixon kind of roll up in there, take over, and let him just go with it, because the guy is super smart. He's got tens of millions of dollars locked on Celsius himself. So of course he'd want to see the best outcome. But when it comes to Alex Mashinsky and Sam Bankman-Fried, they're in the same situation. And I just don't think, I don't think they really care. They don't. I 100% know Alex Mashinsky doesn't care. That guy is definitely a sociopath. This guy, he's, like I said, seems contrite, but he could just be a really good liar. He has damaged the cryptocurrency space very badly. People see this now. I mean, it's all over mainstream media. It's not as harsh as it should be. Like, they definitely need to put a picture of him up on the TV and be like, this man stole billions of dollars. Period. He's a fraudster. It shouldn't hurt crypto. It's going to hurt crypto. It shouldn't. It shouldn't hurt cryptocurrency. That has nothing to do with him. That guy just happened to be a thief and a con man. But unfortunately, it does. People look at that and say, see, that cryptocurrency, I heard it was all a scam. And here, sure enough, there's this one guy took billions, and it set us back. It set adoption back, definitely. And it just hurts us as a space as a whole when you have people like that committing fraud on that kind of level. It's funny when he asked him, he's like, so do you, basically, do you think you're going to jail? And he's like, I have no reason to believe that, I certainly hope I don't. Like, Elizabeth Holmes got sentenced to 11 years in prison, and she got in trouble for about $200 million, right? This is billions of dollars. Billions of dollars. Can we get his ass out of the Bahamas? Like, they've invited him to speak in front of Congress. Again, this guy, I don't know who's testified, and I don't know if it was testimony, but I don't know who's spoken to Congress more about cryptocurrency. Him. He spent hours in front of these people. Do you think he's going to go back? Hell no. He's going to want to appear like how he appeared here at the DealBook. Summit. He's just going to be like, can you phone me in? You got a StreamYards link that I can use? I don't want to roll up into Washington, D.C. It's crazy. Well, guys, it's pretty late at night here. It's 1:00 in the morning, so I'm going to let you go. Thank you so much for joining me here at the Crypto Queen channel, and I will see you guys hopefully tomorrow. Have a wonderful evening. Thank you for joining me. What did you guys think? Do you think you can trust that guy? I don't think so. All right, guys. Have a good night. Take care.